Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Let's Address This with Qasim Rashid. I'm really excited seems like the wrong word, but grateful is the right word to have Dr. Anthony Douglas with us today. He is a surgical resident here in Chicago, has been at the forefront of combating gun violence in our state, the state of Illinois, and in our country, and has been one of the chief architects behind a critical landmark piece of legislation called the Rifle Act. And right now, I'm going to include a link. I'm going to do it a couple times in the chat that I need you guys to read. Right now, we have one corporate Democrat, Bob Morgan, who is blocking bringing this bill to the House floor that would allow it to be voted upon. We have the votes to have it pass. He's being obstructionist, and we need to put pressure on him to actually listen to the will of the people. And the reason why I'm grateful to have Dr. Anthony Douglas with us is to talk about this piece of legislation because y'all need to understand how critical this piece of legislation is. Dr. Douglas, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, cause I'm excited to talk to you about this.
So, before we get into the obstructionism by this unfortunate member of the Illinois legislature, can you share with us what is the Rifle Act
Mm.
and why is it such a paradigm shifting piece of gun safety legislation?
Yeah, I mean, cause I think the bill is pretty simple and is an overdue solution to gun violence um, that quite frankly, we should have tried a long time ago. But essentially, the Rifle Act um, seeks to hold gun manufacturers accountable for the public costs that their products generate,
Hmm.
right? And then in doing so, fund gun violence prevention, right? Why? You know, taxpayers pay millions, hundreds of millions of dollars a year for the outcomes of gun injury. In addition, they also pay for the solutions to end gun violence, right? The Rifle Act essentially requires gun makers to contribute to a fund based on their contribution to gun injury, and in turn use those dollars to help fund the strategies that we know are working to prevent gun violence. And I think what was most transformational to me about the bill is that we are tying their contributions to this fund based on the harm that their products are generating, and thereby creating a new era in our state and eventually our country where gun makers are financially tied to the consequences of their product and now incentivized to engage in strategies to prevent their products from causing the harm that they currently cause in our society.
And so the idea is that because gun manufacturers know that they're going to be responsible to pay for the harm caused by gun violence, they are incentivized to invest and prevent the gun violence from happening in the first place. If we can make it too expensive for them to operate because gun violence costs so much, then they are now incentivized to have safer weapons that can prevent the violence from happening. It's fantastic. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's been applied in other industries. But can you give some examples of changes the gun manufacturing industry can make to have safer weapons?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with first with, their distribution practices. We know that manufacturers and are engaging in distribution practices where they know that their products are ultimately going to dealers that allow the guns to end up being sold um, to frankly people with bad intentions,
Hmm.
straw purchasers, people who go buy a ton of guns and then sell them on the illegal market. In Illinois, in particular, in Chicago, we know that there's one particular gun store on the other side of the border in Indiana that is driving most of the guns that are being recovered in crimes. Yet manufacturers continue to distribute products to them, knowing that this is happening. Right? You can imagine in a future where manufacturers are paying for the consequences of their product. Well, now they'll reconsider who they mass distribute their products to, especially if they're on the hook for what happens when those guns end up in injuries or deaths. You mentioned safer guns. We know that technology exists to make firearms safer. I mean, 10 years ago, we were opening our phones with our fingerprint, right?
Yeah.
That technology has existed for the firearm industry for over 2 decades. In
Wow.
fact, during the Clinton administration, I would encourage everybody listening to go read the book Gunfight, but a former firearm industry executive talks about how Smith and Wesson was negotiating with President Clinton about adding biometric technology to their firearms so that only the purchaser could fire that firearm.
Yeah.
And they were essentially blackballed by the rest of the gun industry from engaging in this type of discussion and negotiations about making their products safer. And so
Mm.
that's the kind of industry that we're dealing with. And I could go on about ways that they could reduce gun violence, but I think those are two of the key ways we think this could change gun violence in our state and our country.
And the thing is, if you're a Second Amendment purist, right? Let's say you're the most purist of Second Amendment, and you believe that, hey, law-abiding people don't commit gun violence, criminals commit gun violence. Well, then you should have no problem being a law-abiding citizen and having legislation that prevents criminals from committing gun violence. Like there's no contradiction here. You should be at the forefront of this legislation. But we're seeing massive pushback from the gun lobby. Why?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think uh, the reality is they profit from gun violence, Kazim. I mean,
Yeah,
this industry, the most profitable days for this industry are days after mass shootings. The
yeah,
data shows that the sale of firearms goes up from 20 to 60%
yeah,
after like mass shootings that make national news and attention. The gun violence in inner cities and in marginalized communities ultimately drives all of us to go, buy firearms,
yeah.
because we are afraid of the criminal on 6 o'clock news that we
Yep.
think may one day be after us, right? And so I think the reality is this whole system that exists, this gun violence cycle, is profitable for them, and until we make it no longer profitable, they will never be a partner in creating safer communities.
Now, Dr. Douglas, in your work as a physician, you treat gun violence survivors and gun violence victims and some people who don't make it. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between treating somebody suffering a broken arm from falling off a bike versus treating somebody with a gunshot wound?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the hardest things, Kazim, as a physician, um, and something that you're not mentally or emotionally really prepared for, is looking children in the eyes as they ask you, "Are they going to die?" And I can remember many of nights being in the trauma center, looking in the eyes of children 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 16 years old, who look at me with a gunshot wound in a very serious area of their body and wondering whether they're going to survive. And the honest answer a lot of times is I don't know, because I have to go. When we go to the operating room, we don't know what we will unroof when we open that kid's chest, when we open their belly, when we open their arm, right? We may run into something that we cannot control, right? And so I've seen story after I mean, I've been a part of many people's stories when they've lost loved ones. I've told many mothers, brothers, sisters, daughters that, their loved one isn't coming home. I've heard the wails of many mothers in one night. Um, I mean, you can't unhear the screams of mothers at 2, 3 a.m. when after you deliver bad news to their families. And so, for us as providers, and as healthcare professionals, like there's unspoken trauma that we live with when we take care of victims of gun violence, because we know it's preventable, and we know also how deadly gun violence is for folks.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Dr. Anthony Douglas, a surgical resident who treats gun violence victims and survivors, about a critical new piece of legislation called the Rifle Act that would hold gun manufacturers accountable for the harm caused by gun violence, the financial harm caused by gun violence. So it would incentivize them to have better gun safety measures and prevent that violence in the first place. Now, Dr. Douglas, while this is unprecedented in the firearm industry and why we need to pass this piece of legislation here, this is not unprecedented as a concept. Other industries have successfully implemented this idea and it's resulted in massive benefit to our communities. Can you talk a little bit about that to paint the picture that we know this will work?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great examples of this in our society is workers' compensation, right? I mean, Kazim, over 100 years ago, when you were injured on the job, it was your fault. You knew the risk of this employment when you took that job until businesses started losing those lawsuits and there was no cap on what they had to pay out to make their injured employees whole. And those businesses came begging legislatures for a solution, and that solution was workers' comp, where they would pay into a fund based on their injury risk profile and how dangerous their work was. And in return, they would not be held liable for their workplace accidents. And for over 100 years, that has revolutionized workplace safety and led to drastic reductions in workplace deaths. And so we're essentially doing the same thing with this industry and saying, your product has inevitable and predictable public cost and public harm. If you contribute to this fund, right, based on the harm that your products are causing, hopefully it incentivizes you to take certain measures and steps to reduce how frequently your products are ending up in these tragedies. And I think, the one thing that a lot of people are not aware of is that this industry is already shielded from lawsuit, right? Manufacturers of firearms and retailers are not responsible uh, for essentially the financial outcomes of their product because our federal government has shielded them from lawsuit in 2005. So that's the kind of industry we're dealing with that operates with freedom of accountability.
And I don't think people realize that you actually that the gun lobby has been so malicious and vicious that notwithstanding that guns are now the leading cause of preventable death for children, they've lobbied and bought enough politicians to pass legislation to protect themselves from litigation in this space as well. It's
Mhm.
unheard of. If a car manufacturer had a dangerous device, imagine a car manufacturer saying, "Sorry, can't sue us. We're protected from lawsuits." It
Mhm.
doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Let's talk numbers in terms of dollars and cents. We've already talked about the most important thing, and that is the cost of human life, which is priceless.
Yeah.
On a practical level, even if somebody survives gun violence, what does it typically cost them to have to pay for the physical therapy, the hospital bills, the mental anguish, the loss of work, the loss of quality of life? What is the actual cost associated if somebody is fortunate enough to survive gun violence?
Yeah, I mean, one we know that based on data from the CDC that being shot and hospitalized is an average $82,000 hospital bill. Um, we
That's more than the median income of the median American. $82,000 more than the median annual income of a working
absolutely.
American.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen time and time again families go into essentially financial distress as a result of gun violence and having someone lost to gun violence. I mean, and the 82,000 is just the immediate hospital costs, right? We're not talking about the costs that incur after being shot and injured, right? The mental health care costs, the long-term recovery, physical therapy, if you are need to go to another facility after being shot, like the long term acute care costs that are associated with that. And then, I mean, there's a whole bunch of other costs that we don't talk about: property damage, right? Child care, travel costs, relocation. If you can't live in the same house you once lived in, or your life is still under threat, right? Like they're the costs that are incurred as a result of gun injury are, I mean, they're daunting for families. People struggle after having loved ones that shot, and oftentimes, I mean, I can think of many families who are now living, in a financially destitute situation because, like, they can't work anymore. They have to be a home care, a caretaker at home for someone that was their breadwinner at one point.
The reality is that most of us are pretty close to homelessness, more than we want to admit. I
Mhm,
remember working and volunteering at a homeless shelter, one of the largest ones in the area. And the executive director told me 85% of the people here have at least a bachelor's degree.
mhm,
And that kinda shook me because I thought, we're always told education is the passport to financial stability. And she said, "Oh, it is, but you have to understand that in a country without universal healthcare, without guaranteed housing, we are all 2 simultaneous tragedies away from being homeless." Because people
mhm,
here, imagine you lose your job, and then the following week before your health care or after your healthcare runs out, you get in a major car accident.
mhm,
Imagine that you get diagnosed with cancer, you don't have health insurance. Imagine your house catches on fire and your insurance had lapsed.
Yeah.
we're all that close to homelessness, and something like gun violence can contribute to that as well. Let's talk about solutions in the last 5 or 6 minutes that we have here, because you and another one of your partners, Lauren Harper, have done phenomenal work to
Yeah.
bring this piece of legislation from conception to the front door of the Illinois House. And I want to emphasize to folks watching that while this is a state level piece of legislation, the reason why we need to pass it here is because we have a trifecta government. The Democrats control the House, the Senate, and of course, Governor Pritzker is a Democrat. Republicans will never pass this kind of legislation. But if
Mm.
we can pass it here, we can make this a model for other states to follow and adopt, and for there to be federal legislation. And if you think about why we have gun violence in Illinois, it's not because we have gun safety weaknesses. We have actually very good laws here, but there's a black market. There's gun smuggling. There's these things called borders between Indiana and Wisconsin, where we have very weak gun laws. The majority of illegal guns caught here, I think 67%, I think is it, are from Illinois, from Indiana and
Yeah.
Wisconsin. This piece of legislation will actually help diminish that significantly, because the manufacturers will know that we cannot rely on people illegally buying guns in Indiana and Wisconsin anymore. We need to be accountable to them as well, because if that firearm purchase results in violence in Illinois, we're still going to have to pay for it. So,
Absolutely.
with that context,
Yeah.
well, we have the votes in the House and the Senate to
Yeah.
pass it. We know Governor Pritzker will sign into law. What is preventing the Rifle Act from becoming law right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to just political will and courage, Kazim. I mean, I've talked a lot about the fact that this is a re-election year
Yeah.
and that oftentimes our leadership in the General Assembly shies away from controversial topics and controversial bills until, elections are over because they're more so concerned with maintaining their seats and their super majority in the state, which is unfortunate because as a the tension that I've learned between us as advocates and we're more than advocates, but us as advocates and politicians is the urgency of our matters is now, and to them, it's acceptable for these type of fights to take multiple years, right? And I think that to me in the struggle that I've had leading this effort is that I see this every day, right? I deal with this issue every day for work, and it's never acceptable to leverage lives for me with political convenience, right? The time to save lives, the time to pass common sense legislation is always now. And so one of the struggles we've been having right now, not only it is the political will, but just like getting through the process. Like if this bill was to go to the House and the Senate floor, the bill would pass.
Yeah.
No questions asked,
Yeah.
right? We have the votes to do that, but, one of the obstacles we've had is, getting through the process, and one of our, representatives, Representative Bob Morgan, who has passed transformational legislation in the past, impactful bills around gun, injury, is the leader of this firearm working group, which is an unofficial committee, of the actual gun violence prevention committee, and it's up to them to decide what bills will go forward, through the process. And unfortunately, he just doesn't feel right now that it's time for this bill to move and has chosen other bills this session that, um, for whatever reasons are more politically convenient to him to pass now. And so I think we just need, we're at a time where, we as people, as Illinoisans, as folks across this country are kind of tired of politics
Yeah.
and tired of waiting for solutions that will transform our communities and tired of the same like excuses when it
Mhm.
comes to politics.
Yep.
And we're ready for leaders who are bold and don't wait for political convenience, but just have courage.
Yeah. Beautifully said, Dr. Douglas. I mean, look, isn't Bob Morgan the representative that covers the Highland Park area?
Yeah, that's right.
And so for those of you who may not remember, a couple years ago, Highland Park suffered its own mass shooting during, I think, 4th of July. And so this is a community who knows firsthand the urgency of now, and for them to have a state rep who doesn't share that urgency is really tragic and it's really painful. And I'm including in the chat an article written by our Illinois State Director for Let's Address This, Dylan Laha, who has follows this bill closely. He provides all the details about it as well as the contact information for Representative Bob Morgan. For you to reach out to him via email or number and let him know, hey, stop making excuses. This is not the time for excuses. Gun violence is the leading cause of preventable death for children in this country. 40,000 overall deaths a year, billions in damage. We cannot allow this to continue. Put pressure on him.
Mhm.
And for those wondering how you can play a role, that is how you can play a role. It doesn't cost you a single penny. Just takes a few minutes of your time to call and make it happen. And Dr. Douglas, I know you've got to be exhausted, and God love you for the just relentless energy you and your colleague Lauren Harper have continued to show. In addition to calling, how else can folks play a meaningful role as we wrap up this conversation?
I mean, I think certainly driving calls is super helpful. I think if you, I know we're all struggling right now in this country financially, but if you have the discretionary funds to donate to the effort, I think Kazim, we just did a piece on a Substack that has the link for folks to
Yes.
donate. If you live in a different state, certainly a state with a Democratic trifecta, I mean, this is the perfect time to start to socialize this bill with your lawmaker. Happy to clip where the language is for this bill and just send it to your lawmaker and say, hey, this is a great idea. Look what Illinois is doing. I think the more states that are talking about this, the more urgency other states will feel to be kind of at the leading edge of changing gun violence. But what I'm excited about is if we get multiple states to pass this, we create a new de facto standard in this country where manufacturers are being financially responsible for what's happening in our country.
I think, Douglas, thank you for courageously leading by example. You've got 200 people listening to you right now, and I'm sure many thousands more when we post this online and on YouTube. What's the website for folks to be able to go and contribute and support the Rifle Act legislation?
Yeah. It's www.rifle.illinois.org. I'll say it again. It's www.rifle.illinois.org.
Is it RIFL Illinois or
Yes.
RIFL not Illinois?
RIFL. Sorry.
And is there a dot between rifle and Illinois?
Um, it's I'll say it one more time, www.rifl-illinois.org.
Got it.
Yep.
Fantastic. We put it in there. Folks will be involved. Dr. Douglas, thank you so much. We will have you back on soon as we make progress, but really deeply grateful to have leaders and champions like you who have seen the horrors of gun violence firsthand, are working your behind off to save lives, and are following up that action with meaningful policy initiatives to prevent the harm in the first place. We're going to keep doing everything we possibly can to help this thing pass. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Kazim.
And thank you all for tuning in to Let's Address This with Qasim Rashid. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can continue to protect your human rights and our democracy. Until next time, peace out.